My wife lied about being infertile, while secretly raising her ex's child, so I served her divorce papers the day she posted our happy family photo. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and for most of my marriage, I believed I'd never be a dad. It's hard to put into words how much that shaped my entire adult life. From the day I married my wife, Sarah, I accepted that my dreams of raising kids, the Sunday morning cartoons, teaching someone to ride a bike, tucking a sleepy little face into bed, were just never going to happen. She told me the truth early on, or what I thought was the truth, that she had medical issues, that being pregnant was impossible, that she'd tried every option, and nothing worked. Her eyes would well up sometimes when the topic came up, and I remember holding her, promising it didn't change the way I felt about her, but quietly, in places she couldn't see, the ache just lived inside me. Every time a friend posted their baby's first steps or brought their toddler to a barbecue, it hit me in the gut. Sometimes I'd catch myself lingering in the toy aisle at the grocery store, running my thumb over the tiny, bright packages before I realized how stupid I must look. A grown man, lost in the future he'd never get to have, Sarah always noticed when my mood dipped. She'd give me a soft smile, squeeze my hand, and tell me, "We have each other. That's enough." I wanted to believe her. God, I tried to. I threw myself into being the best husband I could. Date nights, surprise flowers, planning little weekend trips just for us. I tried to focus on what we did have, not the empty places at the dinner table, but late at night, lying next to her. I couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to have a little voice call me Dad. I pushed it down, day after day, year after year, until it almost became normal. Except, looking back now, it never really was. At first, I blamed myself for the changes. It crept in slowly, like a draft you can't quite find, the way Sarah started drifting away from me piece by piece. She used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter while we cooked. But suddenly, it was always in her pocket, screen down, the chime of new messages followed by, "Oh, just work stuff." She'd step out onto the porch to take calls in hushed tones, her eyes darting through the glass to make sure I wasn't listening. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and she'd be downstairs, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. Thumbs moving so fast it was like she was desperate to finish before I noticed. Conversations about the future, about vacations, new jobs, even simple things like redecorating, started to die on the vine. Whenever I brought up adoption, thinking maybe that could fill the hole in our lives, she'd shut down. "Why can't you just let it go?" She'd snap, anger sharp in her voice, or she'd turn quiet and icy for the rest of the night. Once, when I gently suggested fostering, she slammed a mug so hard on the counter it chipped, then stormed out and didn't come back for hours. It's the little things that eat at you the most. The way she'd flinch when I hugged her from behind. How she started going out more often, errands that lasted for hours, meetings with friends I'd never met, coming home with excuses that didn't quite add up. I started questioning everything. Am I smothering her? Is she just stressed at work? Maybe it's me, maybe I'm making too big a deal out of nothing. But the more I tried to trust her, the more I felt the distance growing, a gap I couldn't cross, no matter how hard I tried. And deep down, something ugly and sharp was starting to gnaw at me. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. Looking back, I think I started losing myself around this point. Sarah became a master at turning everything around on me, twisting my words until I could barely recognize my own intentions. Anytime I brought up kids, even gently, even just in passing, she'd stiffen, eyes flashing with hurt. "Why do you always have to remind me of what I can't give you?" She'd whisper, voice trembling, and then suddenly she'd be in tears. "Isn't our life enough? Am I not enough for you?" The guilt was overwhelming. I'd find myself apologizing over and over, desperate to fix the invisible damage I'd caused. I remember one night sitting on the edge of our bed, my hands trembling, as she sobbed into her pillow. She told me I was obsessed with children, that I didn't appreciate her, that I only saw her as broken. The words hit like hammers. "You're making me feel like I'm less of a woman. Is that what you want?" I tried to explain it wasn't like that. That I loved her, that I would always choose her. But somehow every conversation ended with me feeling like the villain. I'd come home with flowers or her favorite takeout, hoping to lift her mood, and she'd stare at the bag like it was a reminder of my failure. Trying to buy my forgiveness again? She'd snap, grabbing her purse and slamming the door behind her. The self-doubt crept in, slow and relentless. Maybe I was too demanding. Maybe I was ruining the only good thing I'd ever had. I started tiptoeing around my own house, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid of her tears or her silence. The loneliness was the worst, lying awake at night beside her, feeling the canyon between us grow wider with every unsaid word. Still, I kept telling myself, if I just tried harder, if I just loved her better, maybe things would go back to the way they used to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken, something that no amount of love could fix, and the cracks were only getting deeper. Things might have drifted along like that for years, if I hadn't started noticing the money. It was subtle at first, just the occasional ATM withdrawal, a new charge at places I didn't recognize. I chalked it up to groceries, errands, maybe gifts for her sister, but then the amount started getting bigger. 500 here, 700 there, always labeled miscellaneous on our joint account, always on days when she'd been out for hours with some vague story about running errands or helping a friend. One Saturday morning, I finally worked up the nerve to ask her about it. I kept my voice as neutral as I could. "Hey, have you noticed these big withdrawals lately? Should we talk about our budget?" She didn't look up from her phone. "It's nothing. Just medical stuff or, helping out a friend." Her voice was brittle, like she'd rehearsed the answer and was daring me to push back. "You don't have to worry about every little thing." I tried to let it go. Really, I did. I wanted to believe her so badly that it physically hurt. The alternative, that she was lying to me, felt like poison in my veins. But the numbers kept stacking up. A payment to a clinic I'd never heard of. Another to a private school on the other side of town. Once, I asked if she needed me to come with her to a doctor's appointment, and she snapped so viciously that I dropped it instantly. I started double-checking our statements late at night, huddled over my laptop while she slept. Each new transaction chipped away at my hope, but I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. People in love are supposed to trust each other, right? That's when I found it, a folded receipt tucked into the back pocket of her jeans as I did the laundry. My heart hammered as I read the address. Not a hospital, not a friend's house, but a daycare center across town. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to answer, and for the first time, I wondered if I really wanted to know the truth. It's strange. The way life sometimes shoves you into the truth before you're ready. The morning I found the daycare receipt, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe Sarah was helping a friend, or volunteering, or any of 100 innocent reasons. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and once it's there, it grows whether you want it to or not. A week later, I left work early. I told myself I'd surprise Sarah with lunch, maybe catch her at home, just the two of us like old times. But as I drove past the park on my way, I saw her. Or at least I thought I did. There, sitting on a bench under the big oak tree, was Sarah. She was laughing, real, honest laughter I hadn't heard in months. And sitting beside her was a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, curly-haired and bright-eyed, clinging to her arm. My stomach dropped. I parked the car and watched from a distance, frozen in place, as the boy handed her a juice box. She ruffled his hair and leaned down, whispering something that made him giggle. Then, clear as day, he reached up and wrapped his arms around her neck. "I love you, Mommy," he said, loud enough that I could hear every syllable from across the grass. It was like being punched in the chest. I didn't move, couldn't move as they sat together, so natural, so close. For a split second, I wondered if I'd stepped into someone else's life by mistake. Eventually, I walked over. My voice barely worked. "Sarah?" I croaked. She jumped up, startled, her whole face changing in an instant. The little boy clung to her side, peeking out from behind her jacket. "Oh, this is just—" "I was helping out a friend," she stammered, eyes darting everywhere but at me. "It's not what you think. You're imagining things." I stared at her, unable to process what I'd just seen. "He called you Mommy," I whispered. She shot me a look I'd never seen before, hard, almost angry. "You misunderstood," she snapped. "Let's talk at home." As I watched her bundle the boy into her car, every certainty I'd ever had about my marriage started to crumble. For the first time, I felt something worse than suspicion. I felt terrified of what I might find if I kept digging. I couldn't let it go. After seeing Sarah with that little boy, something inside me snapped. A desperate need to know, no matter how much it might hurt. I became obsessed. I started watching her routines, noting every trip out, every hushed phone call. I even followed her once, feeling like a criminal, but I needed answers more than I needed my pride. The daycare receipt gave me a lead. I called the center, pretending to be a relative, and learned the boy's first name was Mason. That night, while Sarah showered, I searched through her old emails and messages, anything that might give me a clue. Buried deep in her archived inbox, I found a string of conversations with a man named Kyle, a name that made my blood run cold. Kyle was her ex, a guy she'd sworn she cut out of her life years before we got married. She'd always told me he was part of her old mistakes, that there was nothing left between them, except there was. In those emails, they discussed school pickups, doctor appointments, and, most crushing of all, money transfers for our son. My hands shook as I read her reassuring him that Mason is adjusting well and that I'll cover the tuition this month. A few days later, I saw Kyle in the parking lot outside the daycare. He was dropping Mason off. Heart pounding, I walked up to him. He looked surprised, then uneasy, glancing around as if trying to escape. "You're Sarah's husband, right?" he said quietly. I nodded, barely holding myself together. "I need the truth, man. Is Mason your son?" He hesitated, but then nodded, eyes heavy. "Sarah didn't tell you?" His words gutted me. "She's been raising him with me since before you guys got married. She told me you knew, that you were fine with it. She's paid for everything, school, clothes, medical stuff. She sees him almost every day." I felt the world tilt under my feet. The story I'd built my entire marriage on, her infertility, her sadness, our supposed truth, was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Kyle put a hand on my shoulder, almost apologetic. "You deserve to know." "Man," I stared at the ground, my heart shattering, realizing that every moment of hope, every compromise, every sleepless night had been for a lie, and suddenly, I had no idea who I was married to anymore. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. When I confronted Sarah with what I'd learned, the look she gave me was almost cold, like I was a stranger interrupting her day. At first, she denied everything, then pivoted so fast I could barely keep up. She told me I was delusional, that I'd invented stories in my head and was obsessed with destroying our marriage. Before I could say another word, she was on the phone with her sister, crying so loudly I knew she wanted me to hear. "He's scaring me. He's unstable. I don't feel safe anymore." Within hours, my phone buzzed with messages from her family, mutual friends, even my own parents. Each text was a variation on the same theme. "What's going on? Sarah's really upset. Why are you acting like this? Maybe you should get some help." The isolation was brutal. People I'd known for years, people who'd stood by me at our wedding, who'd sent Christmas cards and checked in when I was sick, suddenly looked at me like I was a threat. Sarah twisted every detail. She told my friends I was paranoid, that I'd started accusing her of crazy things. To my family, she painted herself as the victim of my supposed emotional outbursts. No one wanted to hear my side. When I tried to explain, I sounded desperate. When I stayed quiet, I looked guilty. She started locking me out of our bedroom at night. Once, she changed the locks completely while I was at work, leaving my things in garbage bags on the porch. She threatened to call the police if I didn't give her space. She texted me a photo of a lawyer's card, saying she was filing for a restraining order, just in case. There were nights I slept in my car, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd actually lost my mind. Was I really the problem? Was I imagining all of this? Every ounce of certainty I'd ever had about my life, my marriage, even myself was slipping through my fingers. I'd never felt so completely, utterly alone. And still, somewhere inside, I kept asking, how did it get this bad? And how was I ever supposed to crawl out? At some point, the pain turned into something else. A kind of cold, hard determination that hummed beneath the surface, keeping me moving when everything else inside me wanted to give up. I knew if I didn't fight for myself, nobody would. So, quietly, methodically, I started to build my case. I kept my distance from Sarah, barely speaking unless it was necessary. Every time she hurled an accusation or burst into tears on the phone to her family, I just nodded and left the room. But behind closed doors, I became someone I barely recognized. I started saving every message, her frantic late-night texts to Kyle, the financial statements showing her secret payments, screenshots of daycare tuition invoices, and odd Venmo transfers. I started keeping a written log of her absences, the dates and times she'd leave for hours and come home with half-baked stories. when she took Mason out. I photographed them together from a distance, proof she could never explain away. I called the daycare and, with shaky hands, requested copies of all records associated with her name. Every piece of evidence felt like another cut, but I kept going. When doubt crept in late at night, I'd look at the stack of printouts and bank statements, reminding myself that this was real, no matter how much she tried to rewrite the narrative. I finally consulted a lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man who didn't flinch at my story. He listened, took notes, and laid out my options with the steady calm of someone who'd seen this kind of betrayal before. He suggested getting a DNA test just in case. The waiting almost broke me, but when the results came back, there was no more room for lies. Mason wasn't my child. It hurt in ways I didn't know were possible. But for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of clarity, a plan forming piece by piece. As I finally started to reclaim some control over my own life, I just had to wait for the right moment to strike. It was almost cruel, the way she could switch masks so easily. One morning, as I scrolled through my phone, half numb, half in survival mode, I got a notification that stopped me cold. Sarah had tagged me in a new post. There, for all the world to see, was a glossy, over-filtered photo of the two of us at a local festival, arms around each other, faces lit up in bright, practiced smiles. In the foreground, Mason sat on Sarah's lap, looking up at her with adoration. The caption read, "Family is everything. Feeling blessed and stronger than ever. Thank you for all your support during this journey." Within minutes, comments started pouring in. Her friends, our families, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were piling on the praise. Such a beautiful family. You two are the definition of strength. Sarah, you're glowing. Heart emojis, hands in prayer, hashtags about overcoming adversity. I felt like I was being smothered by the screen, watching strangers congratulate me for a life that had become a nightmare. Inside, I was breaking. The sheer audacity of it, the staged happiness, the outright lie, made my hands shake. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, that everything in that picture was fake, that Mason wasn't mine, that I'd been erased from my own marriage by a story everyone else wanted to believe. Instead, I stayed silent, watching her rack up likes and sympathy, twisting the knife a little deeper with every new comment. When I confronted her about the post, she barely looked up from her phone. "You want to look crazy to everyone? Go ahead," she said, voice cold. "I'm tired of hiding. People support me. They always have." Her words rang in my ears long after she left the room, and I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. I realized then that I wasn't just battling for the truth. I was fighting for my own name, my own reality, in a world that didn't want to see it. But I'd already made my decision. It was almost time to show everyone who we really were. The day the post went viral, my phone was a relentless buzz of notifications, her happy family plastered everywhere, everyone fawning over the lie. I spent the morning in a trance, sitting at the kitchen table reading through the comments. "Never give up on love, you two inspire me." Each word felt like acid on an open wound. I barely slept the night before, heart pounding, divorce papers clutched in my hands like a lifeline. Sarah came home that afternoon, humming to herself, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she was some sort of celebrity. She barely glanced at me as she breezed through the door, phone still in hand, thumb tapping out another thank you to some cousin in her DMs. I watched her for a long moment, letting the silence build until she finally looked up. "What?" she snapped, the edge in her voice back in full force. I slid the manila envelope across the table. "You should open this," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. She frowned, suspicious. When she pulled out the papers, her eyes darted across the words: dissolution of marriage, my lawyer's signature, the list of evidence attached. At first she laughed. Then she realized I wasn't bluffing. Her mask cracked, just for a second. "You're really doing this? You're going to ruin our lives over what, a child who isn't even yours?" Her voice shook, and for the first time, I saw something raw flicker behind her eyes. Panic, maybe. Or the dawning realization that she couldn't control the story anymore. I stood my ground. "You already ruined it. I'm done living a lie, Sarah. I'm done letting you rewrite my reality for your own convenience." She tried to grab for my phone, muttering threats about calling the police, about telling everyone I was abusive. I didn't flinch. I'd already sent copies of the divorce papers to both our families, attached with a message that simply read, "Ask Sarah about Mason. Ask her about the money. Ask her about the truth." As the world outside kept congratulating us on our blessing, inside these four walls, the illusion shattered. Her mask finally slipped, and the woman everyone thought they knew was gone. I walked out that night feeling more alone than ever, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because the truth was finally in the open, and I wasn't going back. I thought the divorce papers would be the end, but in some ways it was only the beginning. The moment I hit send on those emails, with copies of receipts, bank statements, even the daycare logs, there was no turning back. I wasn't sure what to expect. Rage, denial, maybe just more silence. What I didn't expect was the tidal wave. It started quietly, an old friend texting late at night, just one line. "Is this true?" Then, like dominoes, the messages poured in. People who'd ignored my calls or rolled their eyes at my side of the story suddenly wanted to listen. When I finally posted my own short statement online, nothing dramatic, just the facts and a handful of screenshots, the reaction was instant and ferocious. Sarah's picture-perfect facade started to crack. Friends messaged me privately, apologizing for doubting me. Her cousin commented, not so cryptically. Funny how people can act like saints on social media. Even my own parents, who'd spent months urging me to work it out, called me in tears, begging forgiveness for not believing me sooner. The fallout hit Sarah fast and hard. Her ex, Kyle, called me in a rage, furious that his own part in the lie was now public. He'd believed her story too, that I knew and consented, that I was on board. Now he was left picking up pieces, angry and humiliated. Sarah's social media went dark. I heard from a mutual friend that she tried to spin the story, but nobody was buying it anymore. Her carefully curated support network vanished overnight. In the weeks that followed, the texts and calls kept coming. Support, apologies, even people sharing their own stories of betrayal. I felt something I hadn't in years. Agency. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could walk into a room and not feel like a ghost or a joke. There were scars. God, there were scars. But I was finally standing on my own ground again. The world saw the truth, and for the first time in ages, I felt the weight start to lift. But as I looked at the empty house and the fading bruises on my heart, I knew my story wasn't over. Something in me had changed for good, and this time, it was on my terms. In the months that followed, I learned what it meant to start over, not just in the practical ways, like finding a new apartment or learning how to cook for one, but in ways that reached deeper than I'd ever realized. The old routines faded. No more tiptoeing around my own house. No more silencing my needs to avoid conflict. No more living in someone else's version of the truth. I started going to therapy, something I once thought was only for other people. At first, it was awkward, sitting there in a quiet room, digging up all the mess I'd tried to bury. But slowly I began to unpack years of gaslighting, shame, and self-doubt. Piece by piece, I put myself back together. I reached out to friends I'd lost along the way, the ones Sarah had edged out of my life. Some of them welcomed me back without a word. Others needed time. But all of them reminded me that I wasn't alone, and never had been. I found comfort in small things. A good book, a long walk at sunset, the smell of coffee in a quiet morning apartment. I started volunteering at a community center, nothing grand, just helping out, reminding myself that life could be bigger and kinder than the world I'd just escaped. I won't pretend I'm healed or that every scar is gone, but I'm not afraid of my own voice anymore. I'm not afraid to ask for what I need, to stand my ground, to believe that I deserve honesty and respect. If you're listening to this, if you've ever doubted your own reality or let someone else tell your story for you, please know you're not weak and you're not alone. I'm not a victim. Not anymore. I'm someone who survived, who told the truth, and finally found my own peace. And if you need permission to do the same, let this be it.